So the general theme of Thursday's lessons are always how chords move, okay, which is different than voicings. Like, we're not talking about specific voicings or specific sort of chord scale ideas. It's more about how chords like to move. Something that I just feel really passionate about, that I think is missing from the conversation, the jazz guitar comping and harmony conversation. Generally, we want to talk about a chord melody or a voicing or a drop two type of thing. I'm more interested in how chords move, right? It's like the chordal version of our quadratonics. Like, I don't care so much about the position we're playing a set of notes in for improvising. I care about how do the notes want to move, tension and resolution. Today we're going to discuss that a little bit, but not so much, because this is going to build off of what we did yesterday, the chord progression we did yesterday, which was a really basic chord progression. And I will briefly talk through it and break it down from the perspective of how chords move, but there's not that much to it. So I want to delve into a little bit of tomorrow's class, which is advanced melodic triad concepts, to discuss like some hip kind of pianistic voicing and harmony and comping ideas, okay? Comping for others or for ourselves in a solo guitar situation or a trio situation. Paul, what's up? Gary, good to see you. David, thanks for hanging this morning. So the chord progression, if you watched yesterday's lesson, or if you didn't, was just a 2-5-1 flat 3 diminished. Okay, this is like the slightly less popular cousin to the 2-5-1-6, right? The sixth chord, if we're in the key of C major, the sixth chord, usually we do D minor, G7, C major, A7. And that A7, its entire role in life is to bring us back to D minor. A7, D minor, right? Why does A7 work? Because of dominant chord movement. If you've been through our Chords for Life course, you know that dominant chord movement is the first movement type that we explore together in that course, because it's such a big part of the Western music system, going back all the way from Bach through Mozart, Beethoven, all the way up to bebop, all the way up to modern jazz. 5-1 really doesn't get more important to a style of music than it is to jazz. 5-1 is 50% of the real book, easily. We can always tag the 2 chord at the beginning of the 5, and that gives us a 2-5-1, right? So a 2-5-1-6 is literally dominant movement taking us, creating harmonic tension to the 1 chord, tension resolution. And then the 6th chord, the A7, is dominant movement, looping us back around to the 2 chord, which then loops us back through more tension back to the 1 chord. So it's tension of the 1 chord, tension of the 2 chord, which is more tension of the 1 chord, tension of the 2 chord, which is more tension of the 1 chord. So it just creates this like cyclical loop. The progression we played around with yesterday is just as important to know. It's just not as popular. We don't see it in the real book as often, but we're replacing the A7 with the E flat diminished. Okay, we're going to get into some cool voicings in a minute. If you want to grab the PDF, the link's in the description. You can start looking over the voicings we're going to check out. We're going to start with those, and then we're going to try and get this piano player 2-hand thing happening. I'll show you once we get there. But first, I just want to talk about the basic progression of what's happening from the perspective of movement. 2-5-1 is just basic dominant movement, right? 5 chord to the 1 chord, and we're tagging the 2 at the beginning of it. Then we need to find our way back to D minor, and instead of going directly to D minor, we want to create some chord movement, some tension resolution harmonically, so we can go to E flat diminished. E flat diminished will resolve us down a half step to D minor. Diminished chords can resolve pretty much in any direction. We most commonly see them and use them resolving up a half step, and that's the sort of diminished dominant relationship. Okay. So for example, you might play D minor 7 to B diminished to C major 7. That would be a very common use of diminished chord movement. And that B diminished is really just kind of an inversion of G7. That's one way to think of it. It's like implying a G7 flat 9, but it's rootless. And anytime we have a diminished chord that resolves up a half step like this, it's sort of diminished, sort of dominant. But diminished chords don't only resolve up a half step, they can also resolve down a half step. It's not as strong of a resolution. We don't focus on it as much in standard jazz education, but we probably should. So we see it in standards. D minor 7, D flat diminished, C major 7. Okay? It's no longer related to a dominant chord at this point. D flat diminished really isn't G7 anymore. I mean, we could argue that it's the sharp 11 flat 5, root, flat, sharp 9, and 13, but we're no longer really implying the sound of a 5-1 anymore, like a 5 dominant, 7 flat 9. It's kind of its own little beast at this point. So the E flat diminished, when I put it at the end, D minor 7, G7, C major 7, E flat diminished, okay, it's just creating harmonic tension, resolving us back to the 2. So that's the basic breakdown. If you've been through the chords for life, we have a little bit of dominant movement happening, a little bit of diminished movement happening. Nothing complex. But it wouldn't be a melodic triads lesson if we didn't make it a little bit complex by delving into really basic fundamentals. So we're going to leave behind all this stuff, these basic shell voicings, comes from everything I do. I'm always thinking about a piano player with 2 hands, left hand, right hand. The whole melodic triads approach is kind of built on the concept of having basic harmony, like really simple shell voicings in the left hand of a piano player with some kind of triadic idea in the right hand. So everything I've talked about so far is just basic left hand, simple chords. There's nothing complicated about it. There's no tricky voicing. It's just really simple stuff. Let's jump up into the right hand and discuss some triad-based voicings for each of these chords to get that really hip kind of out sound that we were exploring yesterday. And then we should have time, we'll try and combine both of them together if we can. And maybe get into some like modern left-hand ideas, some McCoy-Tyner kind of quartal stuff. So the voicings I wrote out in the PDF are slash chords. They're just triad slash some other note, okay? And the triads that I picked were the triads we were playing with in yesterday's lesson, where we were improvising with single notes over this. So the chord progression is D minor 7, G7, C major 7, E flat diminished, but the melodic progression, the triads we were using, are E major, G major, B major, right, D major. So it's an E major triad over D minor 7. Okay, if you want to jot that down for us real quick so that we can fly through this and have it all written out. E major triad over D minor 7, okay? G major over G7, so that's a very simple root structure triad. Everything else is upper structure. Chord number 2, the dominant chord, is root structure. E major over D minor, G major over G dominant, B major over C major 7, and then D major over E flat diminished. So now we need to pick the 4th note, right? We're going to do slash chords. So it's an E major triad over a D minor chord. So the average standard guitar approach would say, you know, E major over a D note, because D is the root of D minor. But we're not going to do that, because that's going to sound kind of boring and flat. The root note really doesn't provide much information. And especially if you can learn to think the way I'm trying to explain, if you can learn to think like a piano player, why would you want to add the root note when you have a whole chord down here worth of chord tones and color that we can add to it, right? Especially if we're playing in like a trio where we have a bass player. The bass player is already going to be playing that low D note, so we don't need to worry about it. So we can pick from any basic D minor chord tone we want. We have 1, 3, 5, and 7. The way that I wrote it out was by picking the F note, the third. So this is an E major triad over an F note. This voicing is not that uncommon. If you've been playing for any period of time, you may have come across this already. This voicing to my ear is way more interesting sounding E over F. Way more interesting than E over D for a D chord. Right? If I had a bass player behind me and they played this low D, now combined we're playing a 5-note chord that's D, F, root third, E major triad, which is the 9, sharp 11, and 13. So we have root third, minor third, and then all the upper structure notes. Okay, that's where this voicing idea comes from. It's a triad over the third of D minor, not the root note. Right? The third is a very strong chord tone. It tells us whether it's a major chord or a minor chord or a sus chord. The next voicing is really simple. 2 of the notes stay exactly where they are and the other 2 notes change. It's just G major over an F note. Why? Because we're putting a G major triad in the right hand of the piano over G7, and the G major triad already has the 1, 3, and 5, so the only note missing is the flat 7. So we're just going to keep the F note where it is and just put G over F. So it's E over F to G over F. Andrew, what's up, man? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Okay, the next voicing is B major triad over an E note. Again, we're trying to imply the sound of C major, so we're going to play C major 7, sharp 11, sharp 9. So we're going to play a rootless version by taking the melodic triad, B major, and putting the third of the C major chord underneath it. Okay. If we were to put the C note underneath that, which we could, that's the color we're implying. If we had a bass player and they played a low C, that's our voicing, our collective voicing combined. And then finally we have a D major triad over E flat. About to say 6, sort of 2-5-1 flat 3 diminished, which is functionally speaking related to, not exactly the same, but related to just a 2-5-1-6. It's a very traditional straight ahead sound, but now we're playing it and it sounds like this. Chord melodic triad voicings. They're triad over some type of chord tone, but usually not the root note. The only one of these that we're putting the root note in the bass in the lowest voice is the E flat diminished. Okay? And that's because the triad contains the 3rd and 5th and major 7th. So I guess we could theoretically put the diminished 7th down there, but I don't like that so much. So we're sticking with the root note. Okay, that was a lot of theory, which is not what Thursdays are supposed to be about. But if some of it went over your head, that's fine, but you have the voicings written out for you. Now what I want to try and get into, and we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to rush through this, is try and get a little bit of left hand, right hand movement happening back and forth. So these are, I would think of all these that we just play these voicings as right hand voicings. right? They're built on this triad idea, this melodic triad, okay? They don't sound like triads, but the top 3 notes of every one of these is a triad, and then we're adding in 1 note from this lower left-hand idea. Now I just want to fill in the gaps by putting in little miniature left-hand chord stabs. So the easiest way to do that is to go back to the shell voicings that we started with. D minor 7 shell, upper structure / chord voicing. Okay, so I'm playing shell, left hand, / chord, right hand, resolve to the next chord, upper structure. This actually is not an upper structure, but triad structure, melodic structure, right hand, shell, C major 7 shell. So I'm rotating back and forth. Left hand, right hand, left hand. Right hand, left hand. You following what I'm doing? D minor 7 shell, melodic triad voicing, G7 melodic triad voicing, G7 shell, C major shell, C major melodic triad voicing, E flat diminished melodic triad voicing, shell. Hopefully this idea makes sense, this dance between the left hand and right hand of the piano player. It's very much not a guitarist way of thinking, but I think it's a really helpful way to learn how to create very complex colors and depth to harmony, imitating the way a piano player might create sound. Okay, because they can play 2 very simple things like a shell voicing and a triad either at the same time or rotating back and forth, and they can see how simple both things are in each hand. It's the way those sounds come together that creates this sensation of complexity. So it's basically D minor, E major triad, G major triad, G, C major 7 shell, B major triad, D major triad, E flat diminished. I'm just adding a note underneath each of these triads. Okay. Gary, thanks man. I'm glad you dig it. Let's expand on this one more step. Actually, let's squeeze in a couple more steps. First thing you can do, and this is getting away from how chords move. We're going to take this and get a little bit more advanced than maybe I should be today. We're going to go into tomorrow's topic a little bit. We can actually, once we see left hand, right hand with chords, we can actually develop some solo guitar playing and trio playing where we can comp for ourselves D minor shell and then our E major tension flat 2 quadratonic. That was what we talked about yesterday. Right? C major 7, B major triad, tension flat 2. Same idea, left hand, right hand, but now I'm playing the left hand, and then instead of these voicings that I just showed you, I'm playing the same triad, but now I'm using it as a quadratonic, right, for single note improv versus this / chord voicing idea. We can also make the left hand sound more hip. Okay, I don't talk too often about quartal harmony. Quartal meaning chords built in fourths, like the McCoy-Tyner type stuff. But in fact, I left it out completely from our Chords for Life course because I kind of feel like it's very related to, if you've worked through that course, it's very related to our diatonic chord movement type, but it's not going to be like simple shell voicings or drop two chords. It's always built in fourths. So we're kind of implying the sound of a mode or a chord scale key signature. So we can turn any of these basic shell voicings into quartal shell voicings. So like D minor, instead of root third, flat 7, we can just bar down the 5th fret, and now we have sort of a D minor-esque quartal version of this shell voicing. But if you've put in the work, we still have left hand, right hand. Shell, triad, to D flat. Okay, this is just 1 fret below. I'm thinking of it sort of as like a tritone sub of G7. So instead of G7, I'm thinking D flat 7, and then I'm just turning it quartal. So it's built in fourths. This is a fun one. This is C, F, B. Perfect fourth, augmented fourth. We're putting the 11, the natural 4 of C major 7, in the lower structure, in the chord structure. Actually, we probably shouldn't do that because the upper structure has sharp 11. We could, but let's make it F sharp. So this is 3rd fret, 4th fret, 4th fret. Okay, and then the E flat diminished. E flat, 6th fret, 6th fret, 7th fret. E flat, A flat, root 4th or 11th, D major 7. Not a D major 7 chord, a D note, which is the major 7. That is two, 5, 1, flat 3 diminished. But way more modern sounding and way more hip, if you want to call it that. this is slightly off topic from what Thursdays are generally about, which is how chords move. We did discuss how a 2-5-1 flat 3 diminished is moving, like what's happening inside of it, but usually I like to talk more about like the function of chords and how they want to resolve so that we can learn to discover a sense of freedom in terms of sort of harmonic pathways, like what are other options for navigating a chord progression like a 2-5-1 flat 3 diminished. We did touch on that a little bit at the beginning, but I just felt like getting into some kind of hip upper structure harmony and voicing ideas today. And what's really important to take away to remember is that the physicality of the guitar is very different than the physicality of the piano. The guitar, we have like graph paper. It's very solidified, single entity, crisscross linear thing happening that we have 4 fingers to navigate. So we tend to learn and play and teach and learn and play and teach and learn and play and teach in a way that naturally fits into that view of music. But this is not the most organic view of music. It's pretty broken and angular and disjointed. The piano, from bottom to top, just, you know, every pitch has one key, like one button that you push to get that sound, and it just makes perfect sense. Like it just ascends all the way up. There's no broken angles in it. There's nothing disjointed in it. So we can just see it, music theory laid out very clearly. And because piano players have 2 hands to manipulate it, they have evolved different ways of thinking than naturally makes sense on the fretboard, but we can still steal those ways of thinking and get them onto the fretboard if we know how to look at the picture. And what I always come back to in my own practice time when I'm thinking about harmony or melody, really any element of music, I'm always thinking left hand or right hand. Like what's happening here? Is it a basic harmonic idea or is it a melodic structure idea? When I'm playing a voicing like this, even though it's harmony, even though it's a chord, I'm thinking right hand, melodic structure. I'm thinking about, it's not always upper structure triads, it's not always polytonal, it's melodic structure. This is what is governing the melodic ideas that I'm hearing, is this color versus the harmonic structure, left hand, right? I might play this as a voicing, or I might play it as a single note line. Next chord, and that next chord has harmonic structure and melodic structure also. The G7 is not polytonal. It's still G7 left hand harmony. Now it's a G major triad in the right hand. So there's nothing upper structure about it. It's a root structure triad, but it's still governing the melody. So it's a melodic structure over a harmonic structure. Okay? Because harmony and melody don't always function the exact same way. They're 2 different structures. Harmony is about stacking notes vertically. Melodic structure is about single notes moving through time, but those single notes can imply harmony, and we can use harmony to imply melody. Like playing that. It implies a certain set of pitches or sounds or ideas that can be conveyed either multiple notes at a time or single notes at a time. Hope that makes sense. If you guys have questions, drop them in the comments. Daniel, thanks, man. Drop them in the comments. I'll try and get to them, and I will see you guys tomorrow for our actual Advanced Melodic Triads Concepts lesson day. Until then, happy practicing. Hey YouTube, it's Jordan Clemens with NYC Jazz Guitar Master Classes and the Melodic Triads Study Group. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I have a ton of content coming out on YouTube this year. We've been doing daily jazz guitar lessons, so I'm going to be posting videos like this pretty much every day. So if you dug this and you want to follow me, subscribe and make sure that you turn on notifications so that you can watch more videos like this. Thanks again for watching. Hope to see you in the comment section. Hope to see you in the next video.